Hey y'all. Today I'm gonna attempt an interview that is scheduled right now with Tommy Kendall, a NASCAR sports car driver. All right, let's see how it turns out. I'm sure it's gonna turn out well. All right, let's see.
Hello, Douglas.
Hey Tommy, what's up?
How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. I'm having a pretty good day, I'll say. It's a good weekend.
I'm in the same boat, actually. I had a very productive morning, which was needed to get some stuff sort of just sorted so I can have a more relaxed mind.
Nice. Yeah, I'm enjoying life this year and last year a lot more than I did a few years back. I'm enjoying life again.
Well, thank God for that. Wow, that's good for you. I'm glad you're out of the dark.
Yeah, that was kind of a rough period, and I made some poor choices in high school, and I've repented from them over the years, and I've become a born-again Christian.
Well, good for you.
Yeah, and that played a role in my comeback that I've made over the years.
Well, good for you. That's we all. I hesitate to even call them mistakes. Calling bad choices is better, actually, because that's how we get to where we are.
Pretty much.
Everyone has a different path.
Yeah.
Some are more meandering, some are uphill and downhill, some are more direct. The more cautious you can be of what's going on.
Yeah.
If you're emotional or upset or understanding how you make bad choices is instructive to keep you from trying to make them again.
Definitely. Yeah. And part of the reason that I've made a comeback is I've continued my involvement in NASCAR and IndyCar.
Well, good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's following your heart, which obviously that's close to your heart, or it seems to be from what I know about you. So, well, that's good. Well, why don't we get started? And,
Definitely.
I don't know how we do this or where you want to go with it, but I'm game for whatever.
I kind of have a list of questions about your racing career.
Okay.
I have like 35 of them.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, with that in mind, I will be somewhat concise so that this isn't a 2-hour call.
All right. Sounds good. So yeah, the first one is, have you ever gone through a rough period in your racing career?
Well, I've gone through several, and I should, I guess, qualify. The roughest one physically was when I had my big accident in 1991, and I broke both my legs and ankles and all that. So
yeah, I kind of had a feeling that was the one you were going to say.
So that was a rough one, and then I would say I had a rough one a few years after that. Well, after making my comeback, and realizing that I was, kind of I wasn't really in favor anymore at Chevrolet. It was a difficult. That was a tough period.
Yeah.
And working really hard to try to put stuff together, and no matter what happened, there was always a good reason for it. I figured out the reason was they'd lost confidence, and so fortunately I rebounded with Roush, and due to a good friend being there and kind of knowing that I was not damaged, and so it was good for them and it was good for me, but it was critical juncture. So one thing just in general, I guess I'll talk about just mental. Most of our challenges, the mental part of it's almost always either harder or exacerbated by the mental side of it.
Yeah.
And so it's important to kind of learn how to be your own shrink or your own therapist, your own advisor, to talk yourself through stuff, because you can get into a really negative spiral. And so that was something I learned early on to sort of check myself and get myself, corrected. So anyway, but tough times is usually how you figure out how to do that.
Yeah. And That's kind of what happened to me in high school. I started out as a good student, and I literally won 4 Student of the Month titles. And basically, something happened in my sophomore year, and that's when things went downhill, if you know what I mean.
Wow, yeah, high school, man, that's a tough age.
Yeah, it
Tough
is.
age.
Especially when you have the pride in you that you think you know everything when you really don't. You know what I mean?
I think that's almost a given. Almost everyone at that age think they know everything, but and what the key flaw is not knowing what you don't know. That's something that usually comes with age, and
Yeah.
the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah, that's what I've learned every year. I always learn new things every year, whether about NASCAR or whether about my religion, etc.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the fun too. It's never ending. There's just wherever your curiosity or interest take you, there's just endless worlds. So
Yeah.
that's
So yeah, my next question after that is, how did you get your cup ride with Felix Sabates in 1991?
Well, what brought it about was Kyle Petty breaking his leg in Talladega. Now, how they thought to call me, I'm not totally sure about that. I'd run a couple races beforehand. I ran the Hendrick R&D car at Watkins Glen in '89.
Ooh.
I led that race and late in the race, and so that put me on a lot of people's radar. And then I won the Trans Am Championship in 1990. Did a few more Cup races. It was a Dale Earnhardt. Basically, before Dale Earnhardt incorporated his Busch Grand National team, looked after the car, and we ran well in those two. Had a top 10 at Watkins Glen, and so I think the combination of those things, and I was a big time factory guy in the road race side of things at GM. So GM, even though I was with Chevy and that was a Pontiac, that probably had something to do with it as well.
Yeah, because, I don't think they just hire people without knowing about your skills behind the wheel. So I'm sure that they saw some skills in you, They had to.
Yeah. Well, it's word of mouth, too, so,
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of it. Like they say in the stock market, past performance is no guarantee of future.
Yeah.
But you start to see patterns, for sure.
Definitely. And what was your reaction when Mark Martin attempted unsuccessfully to pass you and your tire got cut?
Well, it's funny. We just rehashed that whole episode 27 years after the fact, or 28 years after the fact, on Mark's podcast.
Ooh.
So, because we were teammates at Roush for 5 years and never spoke about the incident. But
yeah.
I was bummed because before that yellow came out, I had a commanding lead and would have been able to hold on and win, but that's not how things work. And so I knew he was better on short runs and I was probably better on the long runs. So he was coming at me hard early and I was trying to hold him off until the tires got a little hot. He whether it was intentional or unintentional, probably unintentional, he gave you a pretty good slam in the door going into turn 7. And the way that stuff works is, when that happens, you're like, okay, I kind of owe him one. And I think he was really trying to keep me pinned down to the inside because that was key to passing on the outside. And so, I wasn't tickled with that. But then, it didn't do any of us any good the way it turned out because he crashed and I ended up with a flat tire. So I'm not sure what I would have done differently. I guess to settle for second probably wasn't in my vocabulary. It probably isn't even now. I probably wouldn't change it, although I wish it had turned out different.
Yeah, sometimes things happen in racing like that, and I kind of feel for you because, you were probably one of the ringers that, actually should have won a race, if you know what I mean.
Well, I appreciate that. Speaking of being young and thinking you know it all, I was 24, and even though I was so close there, I was like, there's no reason I can't do that next time or again, and I'm going to win not just one, I'm going to win a bunch of these, and things don't work out that way. I had my big accident a few weeks later, and had some other shots, but never got that close to winning again.
Yeah. Did you hear about what happened on the final lap between Ricky Rudd and Davey Allison, in which Rudd got black flagged for wrecking him and Allison still won? What was your reaction to that?
You know, I kind of agreed probably with the call, although it was the first time, I think, in history that they had ever done that kind of a penalty. And so that was the big story, was, oh my God, I can't believe they penalized someone like that. So in road racing, that kind of stuff happened a fair amount. The idea is, it's a fine line, and people will argue about this till the end of time. You know, how much should you let go to encourage hard racing, and how much should you know, and my feeling on that generally is, if a guy just kind of isn't really making that much of an attempt to pass and just more or less hits him in the back, that's kind of the cheaper stuff. If when the decision they made to try to pass was a reasonable decision, then I think you kind of need to let him race. So it was, you know, again, you'll never get universal agreement. That's probably a good thing. It's no different than any controversial call in any sport. You have people on both sides of it, and that's what keeps them tuned in and engaged.
Yeah, and they must have thought that it was pretty bad because, like you said, that was like the first time that happened. And you saw Dale Earnhardt do it a number of times, and it's like, wow, that was the first time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting, and so and it's funny because Davey, I got to know Davey a little bit over the years, and I remember vividly an exchange at Riverside a couple of years before that. Qualifying was going on, and he was sitting in the garage all by himself, and I walked by and said, "What's up?" He goes, "I hate these places. I hate these road races."
Ooh.
And I said, I watch every year the light goes on, and they're like, "This is no different than any other race. You just got to learn how to do it." And when the light goes on, all of a sudden that person's a road racer. And so it was interesting just a few short years later to see Davey, you know, be running that well. And once you run well, then you like them. And once you like them, then you run better more often. It's a virtuous cycle.
I see what you're saying. That makes sense. What did Felix Sabates say to you after that race when the tire got cut down?
He was really bummed for me. He was a really emotional guy. You know, he was really, wore his heart on his sleeve, and he had promised me he was going to give me the gold watch off his wrist if I won, based on a conversation at dinner. So he said, "I really wanted to give you that watch," and I said, "Not as badly as I wanted you to give it to me."
All right. Would you have driven the 42 car at the Glen that year had you not gotten into that wreck at IMSA?
Yes, that was the plan. I was going to sub for both of those races, and then couldn't.
Yeah. That race, I heard, was kind of tainted by McDuffie's accident. What was your reaction to that when you heard about it?
I was watching. I just got out of the hospital myself and was on the couch, my legs in casts, watching, and I was sad, you know, obviously, but just even maybe sadder than anyone else, because it kind of made me feel like my accident, which had happened in the exact same spot,
and it was very similar.
Made me feel lucky in certain ways, but it also I just thought that it was sad that it had to happen. You know, I look at it a little differently now. I still don't know what caused his, but racing will never be 100% safe. But I think we've gone too far in terms of sanitizing the tracks in the name of safety. And again, there's nothing wrong with making things safer, but if it changes the character of the racing, which I think we've gotten to with track limits and everything being paved and so forth, I personally think it's affected the actual, you know, what the sport's like, which is not a good thing.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What is IMSA racing like compared to Trans Am?
You know, back then, I'll go back to that time, they were similar. You know, IMSA was more endurance-oriented, where you had more of the races were long, 3, 6, 12, and 24-hour races with a few sprints, whereas Trans Am was all 100-mile sprints. And so being a big guy, I preferred the sprint races because, getting in and out of sharing a seat with someone smaller and all that. I like them both, but Trans Am was more geared towards the short races. And then they didn't have a prototype class for the top category like IMSA did. So they were both big-time pro sports car series run by different groups with slightly different ideas. What ended up happening is the car companies who sponsored the teams would kind of play one against the other, and they'd be mad at the Trans Am people, and they'd say, we're going over to IMSA. And then they go over to IMSA, and sometimes they'd get mad at them and say, we're mad at you, we're going back to Trans Am. And so there was a lot of back and forth, and the drivers they went where the car companies were because that's who hired them and paid them. And so
sort of similar to Kart IndyCar, kind of, with IRL, kind of.
Similar. Similar.
Yeah. Who'd you drive for in IMSA in 1991?
91, that was Pratt and Miller. It was Chevrolet, but it was, it was Pratt and Miller who runs the Corvette team now.
Ah, okay. That's a pretty cool team from what I've read. And who's your favorite motorsports driver of all time if you had to pick one?
Wow, picking one. That's a tough one. Ayrton Senna is hard not to pick. I grew up sort of admiring him and idolizing him. And then, but I have to say, right up there, Dale Earnhardt Sr. I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with him and call him a friend.
Ooh.
But he was just like he was just the ultimate. He was like the hero of all the heroes. All the people that were doing it professionally all still looked up to him. He was just a bad dude. I mean, bad in a good way. He was just so tough, so intense, so aggressive, so talented. It wasn't just all aggression. The finesse and skill. He was like a real life superhero to me.
Yeah, and I've read on the internet some interviews from some drivers that said that when Earnhardt was on their back bumper and they saw in the mirror his sunglasses and his open-faced helmet, they were always intimidated because they knew what that meant.
Yeah, there's, and I actually, in a small way, got to experience a similar thing where your reputation does the work for you. When I won those Trans Am championships in a row, it was also a black car. It was number 11, but I can actually see that in people when you get close and start applying pressure, they would make mistakes more often than they would otherwise. And so you kind of smile to yourself. You can't earn that cheaply or quickly. You've got to, be on your game and tough and not give an inch and all that. But there's no question there was an intimidation factor. Everyone's human. It doesn't matter who they are and how much they've won. Everyone's human. And that managing those emotions is a big part, no different than everybody deals with in their daily life, whether it's with a boss or a customer or a spouse or someone that's a rival of yours or someone that's giving you a hard time. It's those are the same things everyone deals with. And human, in racers, even though you're a pros, you're also human.
Yeah, definitely. If I had to pick a favorite driver at the moment, for a number of years it was Jamie McMurray, who I met in 2015, but he retired last year, and so then I met his teammate Kyle Larson at the NASCAR race, and now he's become kind of my favorite.
Well, he's a good one. And Jamie too. Jamie's one of my favorites in terms of just, I like him as a person. He's got a great way about him and a good energy and treats people well.
Yeah.
So, but Larson's, he's tough, man. He's, to be as young as he is and as good as he is, he's in so many different cars. He's fun to watch.
Yeah, and last year when I met him, I encountered him while he was in line for a Porta-John, and it was kind of funny. Have you ever had a memory like that before where someone asks for a photo when you're in line for a Porta-John?
It's more conversations when you're in the men's room. Everyone's standing there, taking a leak, and sort of an awkward silence, and so sometimes conversations get struck up. So
yeah, and I was kind of on pit road at a time that I wasn't supposed to be, and so he had that look on his face as if to say, "Who is this guy?" And I got a photo with him that I cherish forever, and I got it autographed earlier this year.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Was your career the same after your 1991 wreck, or did it go downhill after 1991?
It actually, well, when I came back with Chevy, it didn't go very well, the 92 season. And so it was a critical juncture, and Chevy was kind of saying, hey, we're not going to cut you loose. We feel bad, but we're also not going to really have you in a full-time ride. And so I said, I got to prove that I'm still good and not damaged. And so that's why the Roush opportunity. And ironically, Max Jones was the guy I mentioned that was my friend at Roush who I'd raced with. He vouched for me. He's now the team manager in Ganassi's Cup program. And so he was instrumental in bringing Larson on board there. So, but so that was so it could have gone downhill, and it didn't start off well, but from day one at Roush, things went well. I won the 24 Hours Daytona, my very first race with them, and then won 4 championships in 5 years. So it's funny, people that are younger and weren't around when I was driving assume that my accident either ended my career or, it was downhill after. It was actually, I actually had arguably more success after than I did before.
That's really cool. I don't know a lot of people that probably know that. So,
yeah, it was, especially when they see me hobbling around. I still limp a good bit, and so they have a hard time, understanding. But I had my last year in Trans Am. I won the 3 straight Trans Am titles, 95, 6, and 7. And the last year in 97, I won the first 11 races in a row. And so we were virtually unbeatable. And then that's the season I retired. So I retired after basically my best season, left on a high note.
All right. So, yeah, my next one is, who ran Alan Kulwicki Racing when you drove for the 17? Because didn't Alan pass away the year that you drove for them?
Yeah, he was killed in the plane crash on his way to Bristol, and as the reigning champion, which was, but Felix Sabates was instrumental in that, too, because he basically stepped in to help. I don't know if he was the administrator of the estate, but he basically stepped in to help operate the team and to get them through that tough time. And so, with my history with Felix, he hired me. He called and said, "Hey, we want you to run the 2 road races in the 7th."
Okay. So Felix Sabates kind of influenced that a little bit. Yeah,
Paul Andrews was the crew chief and was operating the team, but Felix was kind of took charge in terms of the business side of it, and stabilizing it.
And that's up until Jeff Bodine purchased the team, right?
Correct.
Okay. Who is your favorite team owner, if you had to pick one?
I've never been asked that question. So, I would say my favorite, something Jim Miller did, who's the Miller in Pratt & Miller, did something that I've not heard a lot of people doing and wouldn't do, but he did. And so when I had my accident, he came to see me in the hospital, and he said, "Hey, there's a car waiting for you as soon as you are ready to come back." And I think a lot of owners do that.
Ooh.
But then what the key thing was, where the rubber met the road, was when I came back and then I was driving, Chevrolet we were supposed to run a full season, and they said, "We're only going to run 5 races." And Jim came to me and said, "I promised you we'd run, and I'll run." And that meant digging into his own pocket to the tune of about $5 million.
Wow.
And I just thought that was such a great gesture. It literally, a lot of people say they'll do it, but when all of a sudden it's going to cost you $5 million to do it, even if they haven't, a lot of people won't do that. Yeah. And so I said to him, "Jim, I appreciate that. That's the coolest thing anyone's ever done. But that shouldn't be your responsibility. I think that should be more Chevys. And so let's race with whatever money they provide, and we'll go from there." He said, "Okay." He says, "If you ever need help down the road, post racing or whatever," he says, "call me." And
cool.
So he's a man of few words, but the words he says are good as gold.
That's nice. I've heard a similar thing about the former IndyCar driver Danny Ungaius. He was a person of gold, but he was also a man of few words as well, from what I've read.
Very few words.
Yeah, and he was like literally the only IndyCar driver that was, a private person rather than a public person.
True story. Very true.
And he was like the only IndyCar driver that almost never granted interviews. And that's like a reporter's worst nightmare for motorsports,
Yeah, he was fortunate. The guy that he drove for, Ted Field, was really wealthy and wanted him to drive and didn't need him to do any of the other stuff. So they were a match made in heaven.
Yeah. Did you ever meet any legendary sports car team owners like Penske or Dan Gurney?
Yes, both. I met them, and Dan Gurney became a good friend. He was. I never drove for him, but came close once, but never drove for him. But he was just one of my favorite people. Just so interesting, so multidimensional. I mean, racing was only one part of him. Just really open-minded and curious, and just had a great way with people. Everyone that interacted with him, he made them feel special when they left. And so, yeah, Gurney was definitely a hero of mine.
Yeah, and he literally drove everything. Formula One, IndyCar, NASCAR. In fact, he was like the first road course ringer to win a cup race, if I remember right.
Yeah, I mean, it was more than just a ringer. It was almost not fair when he drove. It was like, we know who's winning this one.
Yeah, because didn't he win like 5 consecutive Riverside races for the Wood brothers?
I know it was several, and now part of the thing, and this is how he won the '67 Le Mans too. Back then, the cars basically wouldn't take you couldn't go flat out the whole time.
Yeah.
And a racer's nature is to go as fast as you can. And so he had a way of understanding basically what the car could take and what it couldn't. And had the discipline to actually not go faster than that, which is easier said than done when everybody else is racing and you're faster than them and they're driving away from you.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of discipline, more than almost any of them have, to not push harder than that. And so, and just in the road races, the technique of how to make the gearbox survive with finesse was part of making it last, not just sensing how hard you could drive, but also taking care of it by how you shifted the gears and matched the revs and all that stuff. He was in his own league.
That's interesting. What Indy 500 do you enjoy watching over and over again, if you had to pick one?
Oh, that's a good question too. The one that stands out in my mind was Rick Mears and Gordon Johncock when he came up just short. I don't know what year that was. It was like 82, maybe.
It was 82, yeah.
Okay. And now another one, though, I have to admit that I think Dario Franchitti's win, where he battled Takuma Sato at the end.
Yeah.
I think you just have a natural tendency to think more highly of old races. There's nostalgia.
Yeah.
You don't think when you're a kid, but I think that drive by Dario and that finish and that'll go down. That's that might be the greatest Indy 500 win for my money.
Yeah, and not only that, but that was, he was Dan Weldon's, literally best friend on the track. And seeing him dedicate that win to Dan Weldon, that was pretty cool.
Yes, it was. Dan was a special guy.
I don't know if anyone, I don't think I've ever told anyone this, but my dad, when we lived in Colorado, he had a friend that attended the IndyCar race where Weldon died. And basically, we got an invitation to go to the race with him, about a month in advance of it happening. And although we were very tempted, we had to decline. But he ended up going, and I watched the race on television. And after the wreck happened, I shut it off to kind of go make myself some food because I knew it was going to be a long red flag. And I got a message from the coworker like 15 minutes later, saying Weldon didn't make it,
Yeah, that's the side of the sport that's so painful.
Yeah.
I worked with Dan about a month before that, filming a TV show, and we had exchanged some text messages like on the day or two before, and he just had this infectious enthusiasm, and like he was like a little kid. He was just so playful and fun and funny. So
yeah,
they all hurt, but that one hurt a lot.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't go to that race because, it was canceled in the aftermath of the wreck, and that would have been like a waste of a lot of money. You know what I mean?
Well, that too. So
yeah, and that would have been a lot of money going down the drain. But yeah, that was just a part of the sport. And it kind of reminded me of the death of Dale Earnhardt because the reaction was so similar,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I mean, racing has gotten so safe, thankfully. It used to happen with some frequency, and now it happens so rarely. When it does happen, it's all the more shocking. And so,
because you're not used to it.
That's part of it.
So what is racing at Riverside like?
What was racing at Riverside like?
Oh yeah, what was my mistake?
No longer possible.
Yeah, okay.
It was awesome. There was no place like it. With those. One thing is just nothing but dirt, but and the dust clouds and so forth. But just it was one of the very first tracks. I think it was the first track I drove an actual car on. I drove go-karts before that. So again, I have a fondness for it because it was the first track I raced on. But it was really unusual with the S's and the tight corners, a little bit of elevation change, and then even though it was a road course, to have turn 9 be basically like half of an oval. There was really nothing else like it.
That's kind of like Mexico City, the racetrack south of the border that NASCAR used to be at. That's also half a road course and half an oval. Have you ever raced on any Canadian racetracks or any Mexican racetracks like that?
No Mexican racetracks, but I have raced on several in Canada. Toronto Street Race, Mosport, or Canadian Tire Motorsports Park now, used to be called Mosport, and then Trois-Rivières, which is a street course in Quebec. That was one of my favorite street courses. And they've been racing there, I want to say, for close to 45 years. It's one of the older street courses in the world, and I've raced. Yes. The short answer is yes, I've raced in a number of Canadian tracks.
Yeah. What is racing at Sonoma like?
Tough. There's probably more elevation change there than any other track in North America that I can think of. I mean, maybe there's more from an actual number of feet standpoint with Laguna Seca, but it's more undulating up, down at Sonoma. So you've got a lot of corners that are blind where you come into the corner and you can't see the exit and the blind exits where it's hard enough to thread the needle and go to the last inch of the track when you can see it. But when you can't see it, you have all the trouble that usually comes in terms of balancing the car and the power and the tire wear and the aerodynamics, to use every inch of road. But when you can't even see where the edge of the road is, it's needless to say, it's a whole other level.
Yeah, and what is Mosport like compared to Watkins Glen?
The long course at Watkins Glen is they're similar in terms of their long distance-wise. They're both fast. Mosport's really fast compared to the long course. The first half of the Glen is fast, but they're similar. They're undulating. They're really demanding. They're a little bit dangerous. All of which makes for a good track in my book.
Yeah. One thing I've heard is Ron Fellows, the road course ringer that was achieving all those Busch races and truck races in NASCAR. He said
Yeah.
that part of the reason that he did so well at Watkins Glen was because of his experience driving at Mosport.
That makes some sense. Yeah, no, they're definitely similar. Similar.
Yeah, because Ron, he won most of his NASCAR races at the Glen.
How many did he win total?
Well, for trucks, he won twice, and for Busch, he won 4 races, with one of them being at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve and the others being at the Glen. And he almost won a couple Cup races at Sonoma in 2001 as well as 2003.
Well, he is definitely the most successful ringer because
definitely.
That's 6 NASCAR wins is nothing to scoff at.
And one year he drove for Dale Earnhardt's team, and it was the one Pennzoil car, and he literally spanked everyone at Sonoma, only to lose, because of a caution that came out with like 20 to go. And that forced him to make a pit stop.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, he's pretty good at both. He's pretty good at any racetrack that's a road course.
He is. I always tell people that I raced against Ron a ton in Trans Am. All of my Trans Am championships, actually except the last one, were against him. And so I always cite him as the most complete. The guy that, if I had to pick one guy that was the most complete, there were a lot of guys that were good in certain areas, but he was just, he was the best, most well-rounded competitor that I ever raced against.
That's really interesting. And what is Watkins Glen like compared to Sonoma?
Quite a bit different. If you compare the NASCAR tracks, which is the short course at the Glen and Sonoma, they're both, they're both undulating. They're both, the Glen is faster than Sonoma.
Yeah.
And Sonoma's configuration has changed a couple different times. They couldn't look more different because Sonoma's, it's always the brown hills and the dirt and
all the turns.
Green. The Glen is a lot harder on brakes, and that used to be a big factor before the brakes got as good as they are. You really had to not overcook the brakes. Where it was hard to cook the brakes at Sonoma. So different.
Really interesting. And who do you think is the best modern day NASCAR driver if you had to pick one?
The best modern day NASCAR driver. Oh boy. I mean, Jimmy Johnson's record speaks for itself.
Definitely.
He's having, at the tail end of his career here, he's having a tough time getting the W's and so forth. But he and Chad Canal has literally changed the game. I mean, the level they ran at, the way they approached things, and the kind of performance they achieved forced everybody to literally redo how they did things. They forced the series, I think, to change the format, to the playoff format because they were tired of him winning. I don't know if that was the only factor, but I think that was a factor.
Yeah, just like how they changed the starts for Busch and Truck when Kyle Busch was winning all those races.
Yep. I think you'd have to say, Kyle Busch kind of stands out where he's just, he's a factor almost every single race. The great thing about NASCAR, though, is it's not 5 or 6 guys that are real, what I like to say, gunslingers, really, really, really at the top of their game. It's 25, which is and it's clear how hard it is to win one of those races. So, but I guess if you had to pick one guy right now, you'd have to say Kyle Busch. Yeah.
And I would probably add Johnson onto that list as well because both of them are probably equal as far as how good they are. It's just Jimmy has won more championships than Busch has a little bit. So yeah, I'd probably put Johnson on that list as well.
Yeah, I think Jimmy will go down. I don't think he gets proper appreciation for how the level of performance. I mean, and part of his personality, if Jimmy was acted like Kyle Busch, he probably would. It's weird how it works. If you're a nice guy and you're kind of polite, don't make waves, you don't get the credit as the brash guys. It's interesting how it works, but seeing Jimmy Johnson race, you could make a strong case for the greatest of all time. To have the kind of dominance he has when there are so many guys that are capable just puts him on a pedestal in terms of overall career, the best career ever, I think.
Yeah.
All things considered. And then, but currently, if you had to pick a guy to say, okay, one guy in your car today, 2019, best chance to win a race, it's probably Kyle Busch.
Yeah, and both of them have different personalities, Jimmy Johnson, has kind of like a low-key personality a little bit, and Kyle Busch, he can get riled up, Personalities are kind of different.
Yep.
Have you ever raced at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve?
I have not raced there, no.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite NASCAR races for a number of years because that was literally the most unpredictable race that NASCAR probably ever had. Yeah.
I've been there and I've driven on the track but never raced there.
Yeah. Did you see all those NASCAR races that were hosted back when Marcus Ambrose was dominating those races and how it was so unpredictable? You know what I mean?
I'm sorry, say that again. Someone's texting me right now and I was distracted. Say that again.
Did you see all those NASCAR races back in the late 2010s or early 2010s or whatever it is, where there was so unpredictable of who was going to win the race? You had Marcus Ambrose, leading the most laps almost every time. And then it would come down to drivers like Kevin Harvick or Boris Said or other drivers. Did you see all those?
I sure did, yes.
Yeah, that was the one race that I really wish wasn't taken out of the calendar because it was so unpredictable.
Well, you just hit on one of the main ingredients to good racing, and it's unpredictable drama.
Yeah, and if I had to pick a current NASCAR race that's similar to that, it would have to be Road America because that's an unpredictable race as well.
Yeah, I mean the nature of things with the restarts and cautions breeding cautions, it's being hard to pass. All those things are kind of a volatile mix for sure.
Yeah. What was your reaction to learning on the tragic crash at the end of Daytona in 2001 that killed Dale Earnhardt? What was your reaction on that?
Just devastated.
Yeah.
It was hard to process. I went to his funeral, and again, it had been so safe for so long, and for the toughest, strongest, most capable guy, I looked around at his funeral and I saw a bunch of scared race car drivers,
Yeah.
And it was just, I was devastated. He was really good to me personally, and it was just, it was so hard to process also because it looked so, compared to on the grand scheme of things, the spectrum of crashes, it didn't look that bad. And so, it doesn't matter how it looked though. The outcome was what it was. It was just, I just watched, there's a new film that's about to be released, talking about Michael Waltrip.
Yeah.
His path with DEI and having literally the highest moment of his life and the lowest seconds apart.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I felt when I graduated from high school, because I kind of graduated, in pretty much the lowest year of my life. And so I was happy, but I was also kind of, disappointed at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's a weird thing and hard to make sense of. But that's that's human. That's being human.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's not neat. It's not clean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many races did you win in IMSA?
Something like all total, probably 20 something, just over maybe 20, 21, if I had to guess. I don't know offhand.
I'll have to look that up to see, but yeah, I'll go with 20 for now, yeah, since you would know, so yeah. How many races have you won in Trans Am?
Trans Am is also, I want to say it's 28. I think it's 28, 27, 28, somewhere. When I stopped, it was like one or two short of Mark Donahue's record. So.
And Mark Donohue, he was like Penske's first big star in his racing career.
Correct.
That's pretty cool to have a similar amount of wins like him.
Well, and most of the records that I set in Trans Am were held by him. And so when I won those 11 races in a row, he had the longest record of Trans Am wins before. It was 8 in a row. And so It was actually at Watkins Glen where I broke that record and won my 9th. The record for most poles he held before I broke it. But that one, and then most championships he had 3, and then I finally got 4. So I was kind of chasing his stuff the whole time, and that was one I never got. So he's still ahead of me on the all-time win list.
Oh, interesting. Did you see the Daytona race in 2006 or on television where sports car driver Boris Said nearly won with his own Cup team at the time? Did you see that?
I sure did.
Yeah, that was probably the closest that any road course ringer came to winning a Cup race, because he was literally leading with a few laps to go. And what was your reaction when you saw him leading that race at Daytona?
Well, I mean, I've known Boris since I guess it was the late '80s, and we were teammates and stuff. So I was cheering, of course, and couldn't believe it. I actually just saw Boris this last week at an event back in Massachusetts, even though we're both from California. So it was just so unlikely. You just couldn't believe it was going to happen, but it kept continuing and it kept going. And then so I was cheering for him like crazy and watching with anticipation.
Yeah, and I really believe that if the rain hadn't hurt a lot of his starts on a number of occasions, I really believe that his team, and if the economy had not, struggled, I really believe that his team would have eventually started running full time, because they had the strongest support from Jack Roush. His team did.
Yeah, that was quite possible.
Yeah.
Racing is full of what ifs, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's probably something we'll never know for sure. But that was probably the closest Boris came to winning, and that would have been big if it happened.
At Daytona, yes, indeed.
Yeah. What is racing V8 supercars like? Because didn't you make a start at Bathurst years ago?
I did. I made a start and then finished. I was the first American to ever finish Bathurst, and I think I'm still the highest finishing American. I finished, I think it was 7th, and 7th or 8th, 7th maybe. It was awesome. I that was a goal of mine. I followed it as closely as I could. There wasn't back then. It's hard to remember what things were like pre-internet, but you didn't have all the information you have now, and so that was early internet. So, but I read everything I could about it. I really wanted to do it, and that was able to put that together with Ford. That track, the cars are cool. I mean, they're about as cool a formula. They've got everything about right. They look good, they sound good, they race well. They relate to the cars they're supposed to be. It's just almost like the perfect formula. But then you add Bathurst itself, which is this, talk about elevation change. It makes the elevation change at Sonoma or Laguna Seca look tame. It's you just go, you're up a mountain and then you go over the top and then you're down a mountain. It's probably the wildest track I've ever driven. had.
Yeah, because racing those cars is kind of different from, American racing, because they're in Australia and you kind of don't know the area until you go there for the first time. Know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, everything away from the track is different. The food's different. The hotels are different. You drive on the wrong side of the road. The hardest thing on the track was also different, was the cars were right-hand drive with left-hand shift. And so shifting as a racer, by that point in my career, you literally never gave it a second thought. It just happened automatically. It was so practiced. Whereas driving an H pattern, shifting with the left hand, you had to think about it, literally every shift and being on the right side of the car. So it was really, really hard.
Yeah, I bet. What was racing for Joe Falk like in your last Cup start? Because didn't you drive for Joe Falk's team in your last Cup start?
I think maybe technically it was, but it was brokered by someone else. So it wasn't like I was really driving for Joe Falk. I think I think that was another Felix Sabates deal.
Okay.
What year was that? 98?
I believe it was 90. No, wait. In 98. I think it might have been 99, because in 98, I believe you drove the 46 car for Felix again at the Glen.
Well, my memory is slipping. So
Yeah, I'm literally a racing historian.
That's clear.
Yeah. But yeah, the team, I believe, was called LJ Racing, which stands for, I believe it stands for Joe's Business, Little Joe's Racing.
Yeah, it's not. Again, I don't remember exactly how that deal went together. So, and it obviously was not terribly memorable.
I can't.
I hope they're not listening, because that'll make them feel bad. But
yeah, because I believe that you finished like 43rd in that race, and that was kind of like, I believe you dropped out early on. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's not a good memory or not a memorable one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Have you ever raced with Robbie Gordon before? What was he like when you were racing?
I raced with him in IROC mostly, and all racers are sort of self-centered, and they think the world, myself included, revolves around them.
Yeah.
But Robbie probably takes it to another level.
Yeah.
So, he's a talented guy, but it's like he's his own. Well, I guess we're all our own worst enemy, but it's like the thing that is most attractive about him is also his fatal flaw, where he can't help himself in terms of sometimes some of the stuff he does. So yeah, but he's really fun to watch. We had a couple run-ins that are related to that. He's really hard-headed,
Yeah.
You hear about give and take in racing, and then with Robbie, I guess I shouldn't single him out, but it just seems like he took it to a different level.
Like to an extreme level, right?
Well, I'll tell the story. The one that stands out. It was Michigan IROC, and it was 90. I think it was probably 96 or so. And I had run really well at Michigan the year before, and this was another one. And so I was coming from the back of the pack, and I was passing him on the outside, which I had figured out. I think he was racing Indy cars at the time, or I can't remember if he was NASCAR. He had more Indy cars, and so he hadn't spent as many laps in practice. And so I was on the outside of him, which is where you wanted to be. And eventually I was going to, when the tires wore, we were side by side for like 2 or 3 laps. And he figured out that I was eventually going to end up in front of him the way it was going. And so we got to turn one once, and he just didn't turn. He just, he basically didn't, just ran me way up the track into the gray. And then obviously he got, I had to back off, almost crashed, and then he just went on. And so I spent the whole rest of the race trying to get back to his bumper to pay him back, and I didn't. And so I got into it with him a little bit afterwards, and he's like, he didn't see a single thing wrong with it, because That's what he needed to do. The fact that it ruined my race didn't even register on his list. So.
That kind of reminds me of Joey Logano or Brad Keselowski when they're not afraid to use the bumper on people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not afraid to use it, but it's cheap. It's easy to use. So you should only use it when it's deserved, so to speak.
Yeah, I know.
So otherwise, it's chaos. If you could use it whenever you want it, just whenever someone's in front of you, you can just wreck them, right?
Yeah. And I've been on the receiving end of a wreck before in go-karting, so I kind of know what that's like.
Yeah.
During my low period a couple years back, I went to a go-kart track in Denver, in my home state of Colorado, and I basically spent the opening laps of that race, of my first ride. I spent the opening laps, racing a go-kart driven by like a teen. It was a kid that was younger than me, but we were warned, before the race, don't use your bumper on anyone because this isn't NASCAR, and basically what happened was I spent a few laps, battling with him for like third place, and basically it was clear from what it looked like that I was going to get by him, and as soon as I did, he put the bumper on me and took me out. And this is something I'm mentioning in my book. Basically, he took me out, and I basically lost a couple laps because of it. And I kind of told the official while I was being turned around, I was like, the green go-kart took me out, and a few laps later, the kid was basically ordered off the track. And when it was over, basically he went on to finish first on the track. So he was cheering first place, yay, and then he realized he got penalized. And he was literally told, leave and don't come back.
Wow.
So I kind of know what that feels like. And so, yeah, I kind of know what it's like to be used the bumper on.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, just the cheap shots are the ones that that you want to get policed. At least yours get.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of not a good racing memory for me. But I would later make a comeback because I purchased 2 rides that day, and I kind of made a comeback after that. And the next race, I went on to finish first, which was pretty good.
It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, it doesn't get any better than that. And, that's the thing that I've learned in life, One no or one failure is a step closer to success. That's the way I look at it.
True story. True. It's hard to remember in the middle of it, but it's true.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's all the questions I have today. I really appreciate you making the time for me.
Well, I enjoyed it. It's always nice to talk to someone who's done their homework and their preparation and knows their stuff, which you do. Like you said, you are like a racing historian. So
yeah.
Best of luck with all the projects, and I'll be rooting from afar.
Thank you. And I think that this next month when the book is published, I'll send you a copy through the mail for nothing. It's on me.
Well, that'd be very gracious. I'll look forward to that.
And I'll sign it for you as well.
I love it.
All right. It's on me. Don't worry.
Okay. Well, thanks, Doug. Do you go by Doug or Douglas?
Doug, but people can call me Douglas as well. I have a lot of nicknames. When I was in high school, I was kind of a practical joker, and my history instructor called me Private Joker, a reference to, Full Metal Jacket.
Well, speaking of nicknames, my dad's nickname for his whole life with his sisters and those closest to him was Kenney because of the last name Kendall. So how about that?
That's pretty cool. And yeah, other nicknames I've had over the years. My brother calls me Boggle Doggle. And other people have called me the Bug and other things.
How about Doogie? Our engineer, Doug, we used to call him Doug Doogie.
Yeah, I've gotten that nickname before, but it just hasn't stuck, if you know what I mean.
Well, that's the funny thing about nicknames is you usually don't get to choose them, and sometimes the ones that stick are not the ones you want to stick. But
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Well, take care, and I'll look forward to seeing the book. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you very much, and have a good day to you.
You too. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye. All right. Thanks for joining me live, everyone. That turned out very well. Thank you.